Hello, Varma. Welcome to our podcast named DIL Digital Health Innovations for Long Life. Uh, we know each other for a very long time, especially when you are setting up the iNAI Center in IIIT, which was a joint activity of PHFI, IIIT, Intel, and the government of Telangana. You also have a long history of working with Intel, almost 20 plus years, if I'm maybe right,
Yeah.
and an extensive experience in semiconductors, sensors. So we will talk to you on how all these things impact digital health and how we can also improve digital health by improving the sensors that are available to us. But first, we'll start by knowing more about you. So if I can ask, when and where were you born? We can possibly start all the way from the beginning.
Sure. Thanks, Suresh. Thanks for inviting me. So, going all the way, I was born in Vizag actually in 1973. So, there's a hospital, King George Hospital, right? I always, it used to be called KGH, right? I always wondered what the name was, still called King George Hospital, right? Then after that, my dad was in the banking sector. We moved around Andhra Pradesh quite a bit in different banks, and then around, when I was in the fifth or sixth grade, we came to Hyderabad, and then I finished my schooling in Hyderabad.
So when did you join school and when did you complete school, Varma?
Uh, High school or
Well, all schools.
yeah. So I was finished high school here in Hyderabad in '90, and then after that I went to Vizag again to finish my junior college, and then did my engineering in Aadhaar University. Then after that, off to US for my masters in VLSI.
Well, I've also been to Vizag several times. It's a wonderful city. Beach on one side and
Absolutely.
maybe 60 kilometers you are on the mountains also. So wonderful place. So when did you go to US and what did you study there and which university was it?
Yeah. So, my bachelor's was in electronics and communication, ECE. After that, at that time, most of my generation, this was in '94, going to US was like, what everybody was doing. And VLSI was of interest to me, right? But here in ECE, you don't do much, right, on that
Can you
sector.
expand that VLSI for our
Yeah,
audience, please?
VLSI means very large scale integration, where if you see go back, electronics used to be all these discrete components, capacitors, inductors, and all these things. But as time went by, all those things got compressed into one single chip, and that's what now you have chips with millions and billions of transistors and everything. So that was my area of interest, and I went to University of Kentucky, right in the middle of US, right, where I did my masters in VLSI. And at that time, going from here to there and being able to actually design chips in my masters, it was really a great experience.
And I believe Kentucky is also famous for several things. Bourbon, American bourbon.
American bourbon, actually two things, right?
Okay.
Kentucky bourbon and also basketball, right?
Oh.
They have a really good basketball program. I never touched a basketball in my life until I went there, and after I went there, I became a big fan. Right?
Wow. So what happened after your masters?
So after my masters, at that time Intel was the biggest company, right? Number one semiconductor company, and luckily I was able to get into Intel, right? And then I was there for almost 28 years, right? Long time.
So when did you join Intel? If you can put a year to it, that
Sure.
would be
In
great.
'96, I joined Intel, Suresh.
Okay. So what was your first job like at in Intel?
Huh. So coincidentally, at that time, the photography was going through a transition, and actually, I I believe the project we started at Intel was the world's first CMOS sensor, right? Until then, everything was analog photography, and there were CCDs, but we designed, and the project I started was designing and testing CMOS sensors.
Again, for the interest of our viewers, can you expand what is CMOS, please?
Yeah, it's a technical term. It's a complementary metal oxide semiconductor. It's a long thing, but essentially the semiconductor process used to do all these VLSI chips that I talked about. Right?
And this CMOS chip is essentially what is your camera sensor?
Yeah, it's just a sensor on which the light falls and it is converted into the picture. That's actually the front end of it.
So when was this year?
This was in 98.
Okay, so 1998. This was also the time when Nokia was perhaps at its peak with the cameras, not the cameras, the mobile phones.
Mobile phones, yeah.
Yes. So do you remember what was your first mobile phone?
Yeah, at that time, actually, my first mobile phone was, I recall, I'm trying to think. Not in the US, it was not Nokia. It was a different brand, Suresh. Right?
Okay.
Microsoft also came out with some software. Right? I can't recall the brand, but it was, of course, at that time, right, very simple phones, not the smartphones we have today.
Okay. Stepping away from the career path, do you recall maybe your first car or first bike, first laptop?
Sure. Actually, during that time, actually not laptop, but when I was in college, we had this IBM 286 or 386, which had floppy drives.
Okay.
One of the few machines. So I was already, used to the floppy drives. But then that was my first interaction with computers in college here in Andhra University. And then we went to US. They had this Sun workstations, Sun Spark workstations. They were really nice. Right? But talking of cars, most of the Indians during those days, you could tell either they had a Toyota car or a Honda car, right? Most of us would buy those things. I had a Toyota Camry.
Okay.
But later on, I actually had my first bike, which was a Kawasaki Ninja.
Right? Wow. Okay. Well, I'm still dreaming of a Kawasaki Ninja. So, did you travel around US?
Yes, quite a bit. Travel is one of my passions, and whenever I had an opportunity, actually in my office, I used to have a map of every place I visited. So, every 2-3 months, a new pin used to go on that map.
That's wonderful. So, what happened in Intel? How long were you at Intel, and what are all the projects that you worked at Intel? And maybe I'm also assuming that you got shifted around in different locations even while I was working at Intel.
Sure.
So, if you can talk about those things, that would be great.
Sure. So, so luckily for me, right, I never worked on the PC side of things. I mean, Intel, you would normally associate with PC. But right from my very first job, which was CMOS Sensors, I always worked on new projects. So it was always some new area that Intel was trying to get into. And also the good thing in Intel is there was horizontal mobility. So every 3-4 years, the reason why I stayed that long at Intel is every 3-4 years, I was able to get into a new role, either a new technical role, or actually after 5-6 years in Intel, we worked on 3-4 new projects. And then the projects at the very end used to get cancelled. And we used to wonder, we engineers are working so hard. This is brand new technology. Why is it not going out into the market? That's when I realized actually the real decisions are done on the business side. It doesn't matter how good your technology is. If there is no customer willing to pay for it, it will not go into the market. So I figured I want to be the decision maker. So I got my MBA and moved on to the business side in Intel.
Two quick questions, if I may. So,
Sure.
can you maybe talk about at least one or two of those very interesting projects, if it is possible? And also, where did you do your MBA?
Yeah, so this CMOS sensor was the first thing, and we actually not just CMOS sensor, we designed a full camera. We worked with Samsung and designed a full digital camera, and then we had a camera ready to go into the market, or at least we thought we were ready to go into the market. And then our marketing guys went and saw, talked to a lot of customers and say this is still early in the early market. And Intel had expectations that we'll sell millions. The market was not there for millions of units. Right? That is one really good example. Right? There are others that I probably can't talk about. Right? This is one that I can talk about.
The non-disclosure agreement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I got, since I was there in Arizona, I went to Arizona State University and got my MBA there.
Okay. So you worked on several interesting projects that unfortunately you cannot talk about. Which are all the Intel offices that you are working with? Is it possible to talk about them?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was there in Arizona for a long time, right, in various roles. After the technical role, I got into various business roles, and I eventually wanted to come back to India, right? But I had this idea, and I still believe that India and China will be the two of the biggest economies in our lifetimes, and I really wanted to get some experience in China. So I went to Intel China, and I spent 3 years there working with a lot of APAC customers, right? China, Japan, Taiwanese, and Korean customers. So I spent time there and came to India.
So this was in which year?
This is in 2007 to 2010. When I was there, the Olympics happened in China. 2008 Olympics happened.
Okay. So which food do you like? Chinese, American, Indian, or anything else?
Well, I if you really want to live in China, you should be able to eat anything. Half the time I didn't even know what I was eating there, right? And I don't have any restrictions, so that was okay. If you're a vegetarian, it's very tough in China, and even if you're a non-vegetarian, half the time you don't know what meat you're eating. So I like anything, but I like Thai food really well actually.
Well, I think that's the true spirit of food.
Food junkie.
Yeah, I used to kind of say that I would eat anything, but then I was in Japan for a while, and
Yes.
then I say that now at least the food should be cooked. So maybe one small requirement for me.
Correct.
So you are in China till 2010, and then
2010.
what happened?
2010. Then after that, I came to India, right? But then Intel was not in Hyderabad, but they had a big office in Bangalore. So I came to Bangalore and I joined a group called I2R. It stands for Ideas to Reality. So this was the group chartered to build new businesses for Intel, right, beyond what we did. Like I said, all my life was in building new stuff, right? So that was really good fit for me. So I came to Bangalore, Intel Bangalore, and then Intel acquired a company in 2016, because of which we had an office in Hyderabad. So finally, I was able to move to Hyderabad, my hometown.
Okay. Great. Again, can I ask what are all the I2R projects that you worked on?
Sure. I can talk about a few projects, right? Some that came out and some that did not come out. Uh, I'll talk about 3 projects. The first project that we worked on was a dual-sided tablet, right? On one side, you would have the regular tablet, and the other side, you would have something like the Kindle, right? A black and white screen. We had a really good prototype, but again, you know, the business model didn't come out right. I mean, it doesn't matter how good the technology is, you need to have a customer to sell it. And the project that I'm really proud of is we enabled actually the first tablets with iris, inbuilt iris, that can do your Aadhaar authentication. Aadhaar has 2 biometrics, your fingerprint and also your iris. So we worked very closely with a couple of suppliers and with actually the Aadhaar organization as well, UIDAI, to get that certified. So there are actually some products out there now. It's not widely used, but you can use that to authenticate a person. And the third one I actually worked on a long time is, if you see the CPUs that are used today, you have the x86 that is used in all the PCs, and then you have the ARM CPUs that are in your phones and all that stuff. But there's a third CPU now called RISC-V, which is sort of like a Linux in the hardware world. And now it's being used extensively. So I worked with actually IIIT Madras to enable that for the Indian market.
Uh, Again, for the benefit of our viewers, what are these 3 types of chips, if I may call?
Yeah, 3 types of architecture, CPU architectures.
Okay.
Right. I mean, this CPU is your central processing unit, which does all the stuff. All your software you develop depends on what the CPU is. And x86 is the one that Intel has, worked on for the past 34. Every PC, all your Windows and everything runs on that. And your phone and a lot of other things use something called ARM, ARM. That's a British company. And this is a third architecture now, RISC-V, RISC, RISC-V, that is getting popular, which is like an open source version. What Linux did to the software world, this RISC-V is doing to the hardware world.
So you are working with Intel on this new project. So then what happened?
Yeah. So while we were doing this thing, right, around 2018, 2019, right, AI was becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and Intel was looking at how we sort of use AI or deploy AI and go about it in a different way in India, right? When I say different way, I'll take two big examples. If we take US and China, in US, AI is mostly led by private corporations, the Googles, Microsoft, Facebooks, and all that. In China, it's completely controlled by the government. Yeah, you have some private entities, but everything goes to the government. In India, we have this unique advantage where we have relatively open ecosystems. We have the academia, we have the government, and we have industry. So we wanted to bring all these people, these three entities together, and use AI, right, to actually work on problems that could have an impact on the society.
So, what were these problems?
We focused on two areas. Of course, problems, we have lots of problems in our country. We can't focus on everything. So we said healthcare is one area, and then mobility, transportation is another. So these are the two focus domains we picked for this effort.
And then I think the first time I met you was when Intel was trying to collaborate with the IIIT. So from the time you are working on these social projects to the time that Intel wanted to collaborate with IIIT, can you kind of tell us what were you doing?
Yeah. So two things, right? So my mandate at that point was actually to I was deputed from Intel. So we had this whole idea, and then we got funding from government. Intel was putting money, right? But we needed somebody to actually go ahead and set it up, right? Having this whole concept is one thing, then somebody has to operationalize it, right? So Intel deputed me to go help set it up and identify the problem statements, right? Saying work on these broad areas is one thing, but I had to go help set it up, recruit the people, and work with partner organizations to sort of come with problem statements to work on. Right? That was my initial work.
I think that's where, in a similar time, we are also working on health on a digital platform, and then obviously mobility through drones. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we started talking to each other and got on together.
Correct.
In your opinion, the purpose of this podcast is broadly the fact that we here at Mallareddy Vishwavidyapith are starting up India's first school of digital health. And we are also trying to figure out what are all the areas in digital health that we need to focus on. As you rightly mentioned, there are plenty of challenges in our country. So we need to understand what is digital health, what are the areas to focus on digital health, and also finally how to bring all these things into the curriculum so that our students can actually learn. But in your opinion, what is your idea of digital health or healthcare on a digital platform? It need not be something that is happening now, but in a very imaginary way, in a very visionary way, what do you think is digital health?
So for me, Suresh, and I'll talk about a little bit of future of what the end point, right, in the context of India, right? So when I think of digital health, I'm thinking of three things, right? First thing is mobility for a patient, right? If we get all our systems right, right now when we go to a hospital, every hospital we have our own records, right? It's completely distributed. If we get this right, then in my view, a patient should not have to carry anything. Everything is in one central location and everybody can access it, right? That's one thing, right? Second thing is sort of personalization, right? If we can actually take all the data we're collecting and treat it properly, ultimately, I think every patient should be able to get a personal recommendation from a doctor instead of a generic recommendation. The third one, which you probably also care about a lot, is going beyond treating a patient using all this digital data. We need to get into the prediction domain, right? Where you can predict a little bit of here is, what's going to happen and do some preventive stuff. So these are the three, I think ultimately we should get it, right? Sort of mobility, right? Personalization and prediction when I think of digital health.
And when you say mobility, you are talking about data mobility or person mobility, patient mobility, because when you say access to electronic medical records all over or wherever they actually want, it's more of data mobility, right?
Correct. I meant data mobility, right? So that the person doesn't need to. I mean, it's ultimately all this should lead to making life easier for the person, right? And even for the doctors, right? That's what I mean, data mobility.
So, so this is a visionary idea because as of now, it's not actually happening.
Correct.
So, what do you think are the challenges for these three areas?
I think three. I mean, this is also something we try to do at iNAI, right? We have all these different actors, right? We have the academia, we have the industry, and we have the government, right? Everybody is doing something, but unless all the three come together and do it collectively, we have these silos where we have parts of this puzzle, but they don't come together, right? So that's where we try to do it in I, right, to a certain extent, and that's where I think what you're doing at your institute, right, will add a lot of value if we can, even if we start with small projects, but we do it collectively and actually do it together. I think that will go a long way.
Now that you have mentioned iNAI,
Yeah.
iNAI was started at IIIT. So, can you kind of briefly go through the process, how iNAI was started, how it was named, and what are the activities that are being done as part of iNAI?
Sure. So as a the whole concept of iNAI was, as I briefly mentioned earlier, right, that we want to bring these different sort of entities under one umbrella, right? Essentially, academia, industry, and government, right? So the founding members were PHFI, Intel, IIIT, and Telangana state government. Each one of them will be doing their own things, but we wanted to bring them together under one umbrella, and especially in these two domains, health and transportation, right, and do projects together, right, so that the end product that we develop is actually deployed on the ground, right? So that was the main intent of what we're doing under iNAI. And the name itself, right, actually we went through a big exercise, and then ultimately this came from the Tamil word iNAI, which meant to join, right? We wanted to join all these people.
A lot of Tamil words that end with AI, almost like a lot of them. I think, which maybe you can say people in Tamil Nadu already knew about AI long time
There you
ago.
go, yeah.
So, well, that's something that we'll debate sometime later.
Yeah.
Uh, so, if you look at the challenges that are the visionary areas that you mentioned, one is the mobility of data through electronic health records and also personalization of healthcare and prediction of healthcare. I believe all these things are possible if you are able to get a good quality data set. But that is dependent on your previous work with the sensors. So, where are we with regard to sensors? So, if you look at a list of sensors, it's not a long list. They're not like 100 or 1,000 different types of sensors. They're only like, I mean, with my limited information, I was told that there is something about 20 to 40 different types of sensors, and that's about it throughout the world. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But do you think this is good enough for us to collect all the data, or there is a lot of work still to be done?
So a couple of things, right? I mentioned CMOS sensors was my first thing that I worked at Intel. So at that time, right, we were on the leading edge of technology, where we actually spent a lot of time in tuning it, right? We used to work with something called dark current and other things like that, which was all noise reduction. We wanted to increase the signal to noise ratio quite a bit. But then, in the last 30 years, technology has come a long way, and now most of the sensors you have, I believe, are good enough quality, right? So I don't think you need to work on increasing the sensor quality per se. I think we have good enough sensors now. I think the work is more in terms of actually integrating all of them together, right? And how to fuse the data from the different sensors. I think those are the two big, and that leads to what you're talking about, the quality of data that you can get from these devices.
And how much of that work is actually happening in India? How much of those sensors are available in India? Because as you rightly mentioned, If you want to get a better quality data, you need to either have a good sensor, which, as you say, is already there.
Yeah.
But if you want to even further improve the quality of data, you need to triangulate, which broadly means like get the same data point from 3 different sources at the minimum. But it's fairly, or rather it's very easier said than done when you bring together 3 sensors and they have their own way of working together, they have their own operational requirements. So briefly, can you mention about what are all the sensors or the types of sensors that are available in India, what kind of original work is actually being done, and if you want to put together all these sensors, then are there facilities here in our country where we can work with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's some work happening, right? Maybe I'll give a couple of examples. Actually, even going back to I2R days, one project that I forgot to mention is we worked on a 2-lead ECG, right? That was actually deployed by BPL under their brand name, right? I mean, typically ECG is a 12-lead, right? So we had a 2-lead ECG that could be used at home. These are for, people who had cardio surgeries in the home, they could use it, right? And we went through a lot of work. There again, we had the sensors we need, right? That was not the issue. The issue was putting it together in a form factor. So design played a big role there. And we worked with a lot of cardiologists, right? There were two challenges. One was a form factor, putting it together, and then doing the actual clinical validation and correlating this 2-lead data to a 12-lead data to show that they're sort of equivalent, that they're good enough to be used. That was one big effort that we did.
I think part of this is me being still a doctor, I would kind of disagree, where the quality of 2-lead data is going to be equivalent to 12-lead data.
Yeah.
I think the best way or the best use case for 2-lead data is it's a definitely better way to count your heart rate, and it definitely tells you what's the rhythm also, and you can come out with arrhythmia. Anything more to say that the data from a 2-lead ECG is comparable to a 12-lead ECG, which actually gives you a lot of details about different parts of the heart and different activities of the individual muscles within the heart. I think this is where, as people keep saying, if you beat up the data as much as you would want, it would kind of tell you
what the
something.
story you want.
Yeah, but there are gaps to this.
Yeah, maybe not equivalent. Let me add a little bit. This was to really reduce the trips for the patients after the post-operative surgery, where this could give an early indication if something is wrong. Then the doctor gets all this information and asks them to come to the hospital.
Even if we take this as a product, as you mentioned, there is a 2-lead ECG. There are different components to it. Form factor plays a very critical role, and then there is a particular way in which a person has to lay his fingers onto the device itself.
Correct.
And then there are issues in the operation where if his fingers are obviously slimy, then it would kind of not give you the right data. And then the data needs to be collected, it needs to be converted into different formats. There's also software associated with it, and as you rightly said, this has to be clinically validated. Can you kind of tell us what are all the layers, or maybe if we can visualize it in layers, what are all the different layers that go into building a product that looks very simple, but it's very extremely complex?
Yeah, I mean, 3-4 different things maybe, right? The first thing is the integration of the building the PCB board itself, right? The hardware board. That itself actually took us a lot of time, right, to get it right. Right, before you think of any form factor, final form factor, all that, just building the board and capturing the data correctly, right? The very basic step, right? You get the sensors, you're not working on the sensors per se, but integrating it all together. That's the first layer. Then the second layer was putting it all together, and like you said, the robustness, right? From a hardware perspective, getting it right, people are interacting with it, right? It's not completely non-invasive, but a little bit of non-invasive. So they're not really pressing on the sensor per se, right? So that was the second factor, right?
Holding it firmly.
Holding it, right? So there are those leads. We had to work a lot on getting them right. Leads would come off, all sorts of things, right? Simple hardware stuff, right? So that's the hardware side of things, right? Then finally, actually, speaking on the hardware, you would actually go out into the field, you do so much work in the lab, and then that's all just 50%. You take it out in the field, everything breaks, right? Then so you need to work on making it robust, right? So those are the three stages of on the hardware side. Then on the software side,
So
there is
how does this transition happen? So these hardware collect something called as data, but then
yeah.
we don't actually see. We see them as spikes or waves or some kind of a visuals that we see. So how does this transformation happens, and where does it actually happen? And I believe this is where this element called as bad data or noise also gets added. So if you can kind of deconstruct this process, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so this one actually, we really had to work closely with the our cardiologists. We had a group of cardiologists, right? This is where real collaboration has to happen, right? As much as engineers think they know all the stuff, this is clinical stuff, right? A sensor, if sensor is giving simple signals, that's okay, but this is giving clinical data that needs to be validated. So we really had to work with cardiologists and capture a lot of data and sit down with them, right, and see is this clean enough or not. And we had to go through a lot of iterative cycles to even establish a baseline first before you even get to what is this data telling you, is this clean enough or not. That was the first step, and there was a lot of iterative cycles we had to go through that for that solution.
So this is where in your previous work also you are working on the signal to noise and then how to clean it up. So I'm assuming all that experiences were actually instrumental in making this work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How do you improve the signal to noise ratio?
This depends on the kind of sensor you're dealing with, right? For example, I mean, broadly you can take as visual data and non-visual data, right? In visual data, it's a little bit straightforward. For example, when I was working with a CMOS sensor, right, it was looking at it visually, and there are a lot of tools that will even tell you how good the image is, right? That's a little bit straightforward, right? But when it is non-visual data, then you need to, depending on the domain, right, you have to see how there are metrics for each sensor depending on the domain. And again, if it's medical or non-medical, if it's non-medical, engineers can handle most of it because there are well-known methods. But it's medical, you need to get a clinician involved and then sit down with them.
So this is just one sensor, and if we go back to your idea on digital health, what we need to come out with is personalized medicine. But if you'd want to document the life course of a person, it's not just understanding his disease status, but also how he is actually living his life. Do you think there are sensors which can document daily life as well as we actually want?
Actually, there's a lot of work is going on in this area right now, right? And if you see, the Apple Watch is one good example, and then there are a lot of other devices also now. Before we even get to even more complicated sensors, actually a lot of work can be done with the simple sensors that we have today that capture your heartbeat, ECG, and all these things. Just getting them together and capturing clean data just with those sensors, longitudinal data over a period of time, I think will take us a huge step forward towards predicting diseases and having a clean data set, right? And that's where I think most of the device makers are focused on right now.
Um, how do you think about this unique Indian context? India is a land of diversity. So, sensors on one side, you put it into the hands of people, and then there is this Indian diversity. How does this diversity affect the way sensors work?
Yeah. Again, I think we probably are the most diverse population compared to anywhere else in the world. If you see China, 98% of them are Han people, so it's very homogeneous population. US, more diversity, but I think we probably are like, from a sensor perspective and data collection perspective, India is like the worst case, right? You have all kinds of diversity of data, right? That's where
Some might even call it as the best case.
best case, yeah, right, depending on who you're talking to, right? Yeah. So this is where frankly, I don't think anybody has collected enough data using all these sensors in India to even understand the magnitude of the problem, to be frank with you.
There are operational challenges also. Again, with my limited understanding, if you recollect that PCB or the board that you mentioned, I was told that they don't actually work, or they might even simply melt off at 50 degrees or 60 degrees. And in our cases, Indian summers, if you are living in a tin house, insides of it are going to be 50, 55, 60. It's even reaching 60 degrees. So
Correct.
uh, these devices are not going to work in a lot of Indian locations, especially with the heat, humidity, and even the rains and all the dust that is around. So all do all those things contribute to even more noise?
Absolutely. That reminds me of the previous question you asked me about my first computer, right? When we dealt with our first computers in 94, at least I was dealing with, everything had to be in AC room at that time, right? But now, over a period of time, now we have all our laptops and all that, which are ruggedized for Indian conditions. I think these sensors have to go through a similar ruggedization process, like the temperatures you mentioned, right? Most of the other countries, especially the Western countries, they don't deal with this kind of temperatures. They don't deal with kind of dust. They don't deal with kind of rough usage, right? But I think that's even the second level. I think our first level is, even before accounting for all that, first you need to integrate them together and get them to work, and then you actually have to ruggedize. Right? There is a lot of work to have a device to really use in the field. We have to go through all the stages of ruggedization for the Indian environment.
So that's a whole new layer of complexity. So if you are talking about medical devices, now they need to be sensitive enough to capture clinical data, but they need to be rugged enough to withstand Indian conditions, and you need to be clinically relevant, which means you're looking at above 95% accuracy. So it becomes extremely complicated to build a medical device.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in that context, I think, so at least my thinking is, before we add any sort of novel sensors into our setup, I think we should first take the existing sensors which are mature enough, right, for all the regular parameters that we capture, right, like the heart rate and ECG and all that. Use them, and then even the visual sensors, right, the CMOS sensors and then the IR sensors. Those are all pretty mature. I think getting a device working, a mobile device working by integrating all these, I think that's a big first step, right? I think that can get out into the field, right? Then you can add new sensors to those things.
And also, at your work at IIIT with iNAI, you would have come across several startups in the healthcare, digital health, medtech sector. Um, can you kind of tell what is a good startup company, what is a not so good startup company? You'd have seen a wide variety of them. So, do you have any experiences of working with very good startup companies versus not so good ones?
Yeah. So maybe actually even before we started NI, right, for 2 years in Intel, right, we were trying to build a what I call a healthcare data exchange, right. So we were working with a lot of startups where we would take an Intel server and put it in a hospital and integrate all these solutions from these startups, and then the hospital can pick and choose what they want and deploy them, right? Because at that point hospitals didn't want to their data to go out. So as part of that effort, we were working with quite a few startups. So at that time, actually, most of the startups are what I would call in the increase the productivity domain, right? A lot of them working with whether X-ray images or some sort of data where they can help the radiologist or and the clinical and the clinician be better, right? That's one set of startups, but most of them were not successful primarily because of one reason. At least in our setup, uh, you can't make just one small part of hospital more productive, but then there is a pipeline, right? Just because a radiologist can see the number of patients, right, twice the number of patients a day, doesn't mean the hospital will make more money, right? The entire pipeline has to be set up. So most of them couldn't make money. But then the other ones on the medtech side, right? I'll talk about one startup which was relatively successful called Blue Semi, right? They were actually, if I remember correctly, using 8 to 9 sensors and in which is a small form factor, like a remote, like a small remote. They integrated all of them where you could do non-invasive collection of other things, but mostly blood sugar. That was a really ambitious effort from them, right? So that was the first one that I saw which integrated all these things in a really good form factor.
So non-invasive blood sugars works now?
uh, they are doing field trials for the past 2 years, so I haven't checked with them lately, right? But at least they were a little bit ambitious, right, and trying to integrate a lot of sensors. As the first one I have seen out of all the startups that I've dealt with, that are actually trying to solve this hardware problem and sensor fusion and sensor integration.
Well, again, this is where a lot of things that actually work in the lab find it very challenging to work in the field. Not necessarily because they are bad products, but except that the diversity and the complexity of the Indian ecosystem has its own say in the way things actually work.
Correct.
What were the other projects that you worked at iNAI, especially in the healthcare area?
Yeah, so there were two other things, right? I can talk about. One was we developed a application for oral cancer, right? Not oral. I mean, I'm using oral cancer, but there is actually a medical term for it. So we developed this application. We worked closely with other institutes as well, where a nurse or even an Anganwadi worker can use this to take pictures of the oral cavity, right? And then the model, the AI model in there can indicate whether the lesion is cancerous or not, right? Uh, uh, India is the cancer capital of the world in terms of oral cancer, right? And especially in the Northeast, there is a need for this because there are doctors, but they are not. There are most of them in the cities. So actually, the screening of these people doesn't happen, and most of them get to the cancerous stage because nobody is screened in the initial level. So this is one application, and this is right now we went through a lot of development, and right now it's still in field trials, right? And the second one is right now data is getting collected on cardiovascular diseases. If you see cancer, diabetes, and CVD are the three of our biggest issues. Right? But if you take CVD, if you see all the data sets, they're all Western data sets. There's not even one clean data set for India. So we work with CARE Foundation, where they are actually systematically collecting multimodal data set, not just any one mode, but a multimodal in terms of actual collecting all the all the what do you call history of the patient, then ECG data, and then CT scan where necessary, and finally even genomic data. Right. So these are the two big projects that I can talk about.
So all these are being collected for the same patient?
For the CVD, yes, we had a cohort of 10,000 patients, and then we follow that cohort.
Okay. So you mentioned two startups, Blue Semi and the work that is being done with the oral cancer still on field trials.
Yes.
How good is the ecosystem? Because the original idea of even starting this INAI as a concept or as a center is bringing together academia, bringing together research organizations, also the industry. Uh, how well is this ecosystem developed in the 3 years, and what are all the gaps that still need to be filled, or what are all the challenges that still need to be addressed?
Yeah, so there's multiple angles to this, right? The easiest angle I would say first is funding, right? Funding has increased significantly, right? In the past 5 years since we started in I2 where we are, and it's only getting better. There are lots of sources of funding, so that's one good part. In terms of the actual startups themselves, most of the and then as part of iNAI we used to deal with a lot of medtech startups, right, or in the healthcare domain, right? There are still a lot of startups which would deal with data and developing some sort of application. The number of startups that actually do devices are still few in my opinion, right? Relatively, right? That's the second part, so that should get better, right? But still relatively that's still low. In terms of the actual ecosystem, and this is where we were hoping to do a lot more in iNAI, but I think significant work needs to be done. Like I said, is actual collaboration between the institutes, right? Like we said, academia, industry, and government. For example, the one thing we're trying to do is put together proper data sets, right? There are a lot of government hospitals, right? But then the data is siloed all over the place. It's not even digitized, right? So on that side, in terms of actual collaboration, still a long way to go, Suresh.
Okay. Without naming an organization, I'll tell a quick experience of what I had. So I was talking to an organization which takes chest X-rays, a lot of them, maybe about a few hundreds every day. But X-rays are fairly digitized. Most X-rays these days are digital X-rays. But they actually don't have a storage space. So all this data that we think is generated and we think it is stored is usually not stored at all. They just look at the image and then write a one-line report saying that yes or no for a disease, and then basically it just gets deleted. So I think there is still long way the ecosystem needs to kind of even evolve to a point that a lot of this data that is generated is still collected, and then comes probably the issue of structuring the data and then cleaning
Right,
it up,
yeah,
and then a long process of annotating or linking it to the right record. So there's still a long way to go.
absolutely.
What about this big challenge of market access? Because again, this is where a lot of the startups, so-called, face this valley of death between TRL levels 4 to 5, 6, where great product works in the lab, you have raised funding, you have developed it, but we don't really see them on the market.
So, my personal experience, right? Not just in NI, like I said, even 2 years prior to that, right? So this is last 6 7 years of personal experience. A lot of it is still driven by the person relationships of the startup founders. I mean, they get into it because they have some relationships they can leverage on. There is no institutional mechanism, let me put it that way, right? If somebody had a good idea who does not have connects, right, it's very tough for them, right? uh, so that's where also we try to do some work, but that still needs to happen, right? There are a lot of incubators and all that stuff, but this point you mentioned of, they'll all help you in the initial period, but taking from prototype to actually a product, it's a long process, right? So there is still considerable help that's needed, and more work needs to be done in that area.
Yeah, and in healthcare, there is also another big process of regulatory approvals, which
Correct.
again is not a one kind of a type process. It's again back and forth, and it takes long time. Where sometimes even a whole product needs to be redesigned, especially if it's a medtech product. We discussed a lot of things. One is your own career on how it actually progressed, but also your work on the sensors and the digital health per se, where you have the software side of it, which helps you to collect your electronic health records. Hopefully, we will be able to come out with more personal care. At some point in time, we'll do the prediction. There's also the medtech side of it, the device side of it. As you rightly said, there are not many medtech or device-based startup companies in India. To address some of these challenges is one of the reason why India's first school of digital health is actually being started up. And again, as you rightly said, these are systematic pathways. One, it needs to be documented. One, you need to create a platform where parts of this ecosystem are hopefully available in one place, where a person with an idea can go through it hopefully faster and eventually reach the market. But there are a lot of things that need to be taught to these students. So in your opinion, one, what are all the key skills that need to be taught to the students who are getting into digital health?
Couple of things I can think of, right? Actually, even before I get to digital health, I used to teach this course called Marketing 101 to engineers, right? Uh, this is very typical of engineers and maybe to other technologists also in general who wants to do digital technology. A lot of times when we start something, when we're looking at doing a product, we get enamored with the solution and technology and forget actually the problem statement, right? This is something I have seen one too many times, and so this is the number one thing anybody who comes to me for advice in terms of doing an entrepreneur, I tell them, you always have to keep your problem statement, your customer problem statement in front of you, and everything has to pivot around it, because people start with something, but as they start developing solution, it moves away from that. So that's the number one thing, and it really has to be inculcated in the students, right? And number two, since we're talking about
Can you quickly repeat what's the title of that course that you are
I
doing?
used to call marketing 101 for engineers, right? And actually I did a broadcast on this with Task. It's on YouTube as well.
Yeah, I think we need to maybe work on renaming the course as Marketing One-on-One for Digital Health People
Yes.
and come out with a similar course here.
Yes.
Yes, please. The next skill that
Yeah. The next thing is especially in today's thing, even before AI, I would make the same statement. Especially with the advent of AI, I think this is even more relevant, right? Technology is a means. Ultimately, the solution has to solve a problem, and technology is a means. And we should not let technology override what we're doing. We should use it as one of the elements we have in our solution, right? There are other things that I might say, but I think these two things have to be inculcated in the students pretty much.
how do we teach this to the students? Because when you said, like, the focus always has to be on the purpose of the product or the service itself.
Yeah.
Now you've been through Intel where you have worked on wonderful projects, and then you also gone through this experience where somebody would have actually shelved it off. It would have been extremely challenging to even understand that, or perhaps like go through that process. So you have been through that cycle several times.
Yeah.
But for a relatively much younger person who always thinks that, as you rightly mentioned, enamored by their own product or their idea, it's extremely challenging to kind of inculcate this idea. How do we teach this to our students?
Yeah. Maybe I'll expand on it a little bit, right? You start a project, right? And then you have a set of requirements, and then whoever is working on it comes with a list of features. Okay, this is my product, this is the features, right? As you go through the process, at every step I used to check with them, because you start with a list of things and then slowly you keep adding more things. Anytime anybody came with me and said, I want to do two more things, I used to immediately go back and say, go back to the requirements and tell me what problem are you solving for the customer by adding these two things. So this is an iterative process where you have to have your eye on the ball. Anything I'm adding, does it do anything for the customer? Am I solving anything for the right, the original problem? So there's an iterative process, need to keep eye on the ball. That's one thing. The second aspect you mentioned, right? Technology, right? Recently, I was a jury member for one of the startups where the developer was more enamored with the now the latest thing in this AI world is called vibe coding. I don't know if you heard, right? Where the tools have become so good, anybody with no background can just give a few prompts and the tool will generate all the code. And people think it's a great thing, but ultimately the tool is only as good as the inputs that go into it, right? And this all sounds nice if something beautiful comes out, but as usual, something goes wrong, then the engineer has no clue what went wrong. Debugging is very difficult. So these are the things where the engineers get enamored with technology and not and right, and don't actually focus on actual development process.
And I think this also slightly relates to process documentation. So you need to document the process, and as you rightly mentioned, if AI or ChatGPT or any of these LLMs gives you the code, what happens if anything goes wrong?
Goes wrong.
You have got no clue how this code was actually arrived at.
Correct.
So either you should have an idea and then use AI as a backup or to fast track your work, or if you're using AI where you don't know how this process works, then again it's going to be a bit of a challenge.
Correct.
Um, do you want to kind of highlight any of the success stories or any other startup companies that you think are doing great work, or any institutions where this ecosystem is relatively well developed or on the process of developing them?
Not maybe startups, but maybe at least there are two institutions in Hyderabad, right? Because I work with them a little bit closely, which are trying to like foster this ecosystem, right? One is AIG, where they institutionalize the research part of it, where every doctor, beyond doing whatever they do, right, to earn money for AIG, spend significant amount of time on research, right? And also Dr. Nagesh Reddy, right, focuses a lot of work on not only doing research but similar things we talked about, putting together good data sets and things like that. That's one institute. And the one is the LV Prasad Eye Hospital, right? They're also trying to foster this ecosystem where in terms of collecting clean data and maintaining good health records, right? These are two examples I can think of in Hyderabad, right? But again, this needs to be a lot bigger effort and not just couple of institutes doing because somebody there is driving it.
Going back to your career, so what's next Varma is doing?
Yeah, so I was with iNAI for the past 3 years. Then there have been few changes, so I got out of iNAI. So I've been in the corporate world for a long time. So finally, I jumped into the startup world, right? So now I'm doing one semiconductor startup and one AI startup. So it's a new adventure for me.
Well, I actually learned a lot listening to you because we are also trying to bring together a bunch of sensors and then make them work to collect data from the human body externally. But the challenges that we just now discussed basically all apply to us. How do you bring together all the sensors? How do you make it work in a ruggedized environment? How do you collect all the data? And there are lots of operational challenges, definitely noise issues. So I think we'll continue the conversation, but it's been great talking to you and a great learning experience. Thank you for visiting us, and we hope to continue our work, our collaboration in the future also.
Thank you, Suresh. We'll continue the conversation.